Welcome to Cedar's Compass, where we explore the dynamic interplay between our inner landscape and our planet's ecology. Delve deep into the worlds of science, medicine, and philosophy as we discover the threads that weave us into the larger tapestry of life on Earth.
The concept of essence comes from ancient Chinese Taoist thought, really from Taoist medicine. And essence is considered to be the fundamental substance that creates, makes up, and directs life. It is initiated when conception is initiated. So it's the meeting of yin and yang, as we've talked about throughout these lectures, is that you bring together the two elements, yin and yang, and in that moment, there's the creation of essence. And it's really the blending or the melding of these two different essences that came together to create a new essence. And it's just like we would think of as DNA today. It's a map. It's a map that lays out how this living organism is going to be made. And it's also the material itself to make it. Now, of course, as we know with DNA, we think of it as being a map, where DNA is the way that it's going to go. But imagine that in that initiatory phase, when yin and yang have come together and there's this conceived life, and it begins to divide on a plane and eventually into three dimensions, right? It really moves from a singularity to a duality into a three-dimensional being. And then, of course, becomes, as we say in Taoist, not the 10,000 things, or this very complex living organism. So, but in that place, there's an energy, there's a life force, there's something that is directing this division, this opening and closing of DNA and rewinding and, remaking and structuring this thing into what it's going to be. And essence is the directing force, just like DNA is the map. But in the essence concept, it's considered to be a finite material. You're given that much material at the moment of conception. And it is, of course, dependent on what was the essence of the parents that came together. Just to transpose it right straight across to genetics, right? DNA from dad, DNA from mom comes together. Now you have DNA of child. The DNA may be strong in some areas, it may be weak in other areas. We're going to talk about how the DNA and the essence both are systems or concepts that help us understand ancestry and ancestral lineage and the impact of what happens over time into a living organism to change the DNA, to affect the essence, to then affect the outcome of the offspring in the future. So bringing us back to this idea that at that very small stage of life, the essence is going to direct this making of the being. And once the being is totally formed, now you go through all the different processes, right? You have the youthfulness, suckling on the mother, and you're constantly getting input from outside. You're always supplementing the amount of essence that you have to use as a living thing by taking in nourishment from the material, from the world around you. At the same time, you're also having to use essence to build and make yourself. And we're this marriage between earth, right, and heaven. Earth being all the materials, right? So you're getting the milk from the mother, you're getting food from the earth, you're getting all this material that then you're reshaping, right? Well, essence is directing that reshaping, but essence is also having to counteract the solar forces, like the heavenly father forces, right? These forces that are coming in that are actually creating energy and bringing energy in, but the essence has to actually quench the fires, because inside the body, as we take in all this nourishment, that's really essence rich, right? Like the essence that was in something, if it's really fresh and you just got your salad from the garden, it's got more essence in it, right? That essence of the salad is going to be depleting over time, just like an animal that you get. Everything has an essence in it, and if you can get that essence in your body, you can digest it and extract it and assimilate it. You get some essence out of that, and you don't have to use as much of your essence along the way. But at the same time, you're going to be making energy all the time. And in that process, we use oxygen. So this is an oxygen-rich environment that requires this literal burning of fuels, right? And mostly it's going to be burning glucose. We're going to take things in the environment, break them down into glucose, or fatty acids. We'll take fats and we'll take those and we'll beta oxidize them, break them down into little bits. And pretty much we break it down into one thing, right? acetyl coenzyme A, that's this molecule that then drives this whole elegant cellular respiration process where we make ATP, right? Which I've talked about as the currency of Qi. It's like an expression of a structure of life force because we use it to create action, to create energy, to build new, to make new hormones, new structures, new nerves, anything. We use ATP to drive the process. But in that process of burning that fuel in oxygen, we make free radicals. We create heat. And so we have to use our essence every moment of every day to quench the fire. Essence is this yin material. It's the structural form of us. It's what gives rise to this softness, the suppleness, and also the strength. But essence can become Qi in our bodies. It's considered to be such a fine form of material. You couldn't actually weigh it. You couldn't measure it. It's almost like it's coming in from another dimension or something. It's like, in order to understand this, we have to expand our awareness a little bit to understand it. It's not just DNA, but genetics is the closest corollary we have to the essence concept. So to simplify for you, essence, you have a certain amount as you're coming into life through the essence that came from your parents. That's called congenital essence. You can replenish your essence throughout your life, and that requires you have really good digestion, right? You also can protect your essence. You can actually reduce the amount of essence you expend in every moment. Well, like I said, if you burn it really fast, if you're creating a lot of fuel and putting out a lot of action and energy and a lot of building, it can take a lot of essence. Now, of course, there's a balance because you also can gain essence through strong practice. This is where things like Qi Gong, things like Tai Chi, things like, moderate to high intensity exercise, where you're not pushing too far that you're breaking yourself down, you're actually building yourself up. You're strengthening yourself. And you can anchor your essence in your body by really amplifying the signal of your structure. And that's something that I'd love to get into more in the future, kind of get into detail about that, because I'm a big believer in the practice of Qi Gong, the cultivation, strengthening this container of essence in order to extend health and longevity. So imagine this. Imagine that we look at chronic diseases as being, many of them, related to genes. And of course, we know that most cancers aren't actually, germline cancers. They're not a gene that's, the cause that's in the sperm or the egg. That's not necessary. That's only 5 to 10% of all cancers. But we know that there's a link to the way that the DNA is laid out in an individual. And we can look at all kinds of different genes that we now have studied, and we can see risk factors for potential aberrant growth because you put certain ecological pressures on that DNA and it starts to express its mutations. And those mutations result in mutations in the offspring of those cells, which then eventually leads to a neoplasm. But on the essence side of it, if you start to deplete your essence really quickly in life, you will have the same outcome. You'll start to have chronic diseases, and it can be autoimmune disease, which is, again, a lack of the essence making yin materials, nourishing like blood, body fluids, soft cooling tissues that hold things and soothe things, even our steroid, cortisone in our bodies. It becomes a very yin factor that cools off that inflammatory signaling to stop it so it doesn't get out of control. But when there's not enough essence available, the yin doesn't manifest, and then little fires get started. And how did the yin get depleted? Well, the little fires got started and demanded that I use a lot of my essence to put them out. Eventually, my body's like, I don't have enough essence to put out all the fires right now. Because one of the concepts that I want to convey about essence, and this is something that I've learned, it's deep in the Taoist texts and deep in there too, but you don't always hear about it or talk about it in modern medical schools, the Chinese medicine schools. But the idea is that there's an amount of essence that we have, a finite amount that's going to be distributed throughout our life. But we also hold some of that essence as like, maybe it's what we call source Qi. It's like this very, very fine material that has the potential to be many different kinds of structure or energy in our body. And there's only so much of that. And I think, in my understanding, it's held in the kidney adrenal network. I call it the kidney essence adrenal network. In Chinese medicine, the kidney is the house of the essence. Of course, when you look at embryology, you see that the kidneys form very early. The kidneys are associated with the formation of the spinal cord, of the nervous system, of the brainstem and the brain, of the bone marrow and the bones, all that structural material that starts to have everything else form around it. So it's very fundamental. That's the first place that the essence starts to create the individual, right? It's the same thing with DNA. The DNA starts to say, hey, in that first cellular, this first marriage, the DNA says, here's what we're going to do. You start manufacturing this person, this individual, these cells to make them up over time, right? Same story. But so as you're in your life, the choices that you make will affect how fast you burn up your essence or how slow you use it. So this idea that there's a deep well, my thought is that there's a drip, drip, drip that's coming into the body over time. And that's just sort of like, that's just what you get. You know, for me, Dr. Cedar, I have a certain amount of essence that's dripping into my system every day. And within that kidney adrenal network, there's a storage system where I can contain some of that essence that's readily available to be used now. Okay? And each of us has a different drip, and each of us has a different capacity to hold. Now, this is where it gets really interesting to me, because if we understand that in traditional Taoist thought, the kidney system, the kidney organ network houses the essence, the adrenal system, which is also the suprarenal glands that sit on top of the kidney, I consider them to be control centers, command centers. If you've studied modern, physiology, you're well aware of the adrenal network and how it's influential on how we respond to stress, right? It's our stress response system. But that's mostly the adrenal cortex, meaning the outside of the adrenal gland. It makes the cortisol, right, which is a major stress hormone, regulates blood sugar. It has a huge amount of effects in our body. And then it gets converted to cortisone, which is our primary steroid, right? You think about hydrocortisone when you go to the store and you get the cream to stop itching. That's that putting out the fire, right? We're mimicking that essence transforming into cortisone in our bodies to put out a little fire, to slow down inflammation. Okay? So in that kidney adrenal network where you've stored that essence, you're either going to release it through the adrenal cortex in the cortisone, cortisol, or you can get into the medulla of the adrenal. That's the inside of it. And in the inner portion of it is where we make what are called the catecholamines. The primary ones that we talk about are adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine, same thing, just different, name. We also make dopamine, another catecholamine that comes from the adrenal medulla. These are all built on a backbone of an amino acid called tyrosine, just like our thyroid hormone, which of course directs those little furnaces that are burning fuels to make energy. So we'll get back to that at a later date. So the idea though is that, okay, here we have this adrenal gland that in response to stress is releasing cortisol and cortisone, what are called the mineralocorticoids, which control fluid and salt balance in the body, the glucocorticoids, which I just mentioned, and then in the medulla, these adrenergic catecholamines. And adrenergic means they stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. They stimulate the system that acts on stress, right? So this is back, so dialing it back again, let's go back to the idea that there's this amount of essence that we have sitting in our kidney essence adrenal network, okay? The adrenal glands are the command center. They can make essence into any one of these numbers of signals, molecules. So it's basically taking that essence and forming it into something, right? That then demands the body do things to act, to respond to the stress. Here's a concept. When I was a kid, I remember news articles coming out where the story would be that a woman came out of a building and she was holding her daughter's hand, and then her daughter saw something and ran out into the street, and let's see, the wrong story. Okay, let's say a different story. So here's a story from a news article. Someone's working under a car. The jack breaks and the car lands on the person. The person's partner, their wife, husband, was right next door, sees the situation, sees the person being crushed, runs over, bends down, and in this burst of essence, right, this huge amount of epinephrine, norepinephrine, just pumping her body full of force. She lifts up the car, and this person, her loved one, slides out. And of course, she drops the car, and then, her body's just kind of, whoa, like she's shaking. And then the next day, she has a streak of white hair on her head, right? Essence manifests through the blood and then into the hair. The hair is the extension of essence. It's very connected to genetics now, too. We'll see that certain genes predict graying of hair at different times. Again, essence isn't just it's not just the simple thing, it's all the same. Essence is obviously very complex also, and it becomes all kinds of different forms. So I want to talk about essence in terms of how it relates directly to genetics, because the idea from essence is that you have this finite amount and you burn it up. Well, if we want to try to make sense of that in terms of genetics, I like to use the work of David Sinclair. He's a geneticist who's written some books now. He's really pretty famous, and he's really got a great perspective on genetics, and I love what he has to say. He gives an analogy of digital and analog versions of our DNA, where there's a digital version, and to me, that's the essence that you have at the deep well that's being slowly dripped into the holding tank of the kidney adrenal essence network. In his model, that's the hard drive. Now, the hard drive is constantly making copies. Imagine that you took and you made CDs or DVDs, and then you played those in players all over to make up the network. This is a body, and every cell from the original DNA hard drive is now a disk. But that disk is going to be played, right? Every time it's played, it's going to get some scratches on it. You've had DVDs, you know how this goes. The DVDs only last so long, and then suddenly you can't hear the music, right? It skips or it doesn't play right. So in the same way, over time, as we play the copies get scratched. That's the analog part. It's not a digital pure record anymore. It's now another thing. And a problem happens. And this is where we would say at this point, this is when the essence has been depleted. There's not enough. And in an aged person, the deep well is slowed and the drip has slowed down, right? The drip into the holding tank has slowed. And so now, even if you're conserving your essence, you're still not getting a whole lot. That's why, that's what happens as we age. That's that finite number, right? Finite, not number, but amount of essence. But so as the geneticist describes it, this scratch on the record means that as this cell with this scratched DNA makes a new copy, the new copy isn't quite the same. Where do the scratches come from? I described this before. When we interact with this oxygen-rich environment and we make fuel, we create free radicals. That has a cost. That's damaging us. We also get damage from many other things. We can get damaged from really big outputs, like we talked about with the catecholamines. Being stressed out all the time will definitely deplete your essence. It will definitely drive the sympathetic nervous system. That is the nervous system that says, increase the heart rate, put more blood and sugar to the brain, increase the blood pressure, and get ready to run from the bear, right? That pump out, that's going to deplete our essence, and it's going to drive us into this sympathetic state, okay? And so one of the things that is really important about this aging idea, like I was saying, is that as we hit about age 35, our essence drip starts to slow down. That's a generalization. Taoist thought goes in 7-year cycles in general. And so after about 5 cycles, we don't have enough essence coming in. And you'll see that. What do we see in modern science? Your DHEA levels begin to decline. What's DHEA? DHEA is another hormone made in the adrenal gland that is a precursor, a structure that starts to make all kinds of other things that build us. We make many things out of DHEA, like our testosterone, right, which tells our body to rebuild itself, like the estrogens, which signal for our body to rebuild itself, keep us juicy, keep us strong. These are things that without them, we would just slowly deteriorate. So we need that signal. That's a form of essence. That's essence becoming material. That's how it transmutes itself to make us. So as this aging process goes, what we can do, because it's you can't like give someone essence, you know? If you took a human life and you saw it from a little initiation energy all the way to a full-grown human, all the way through, and then shrinking back down, the peak of the essence where it's output all of its force and it's got that full growth, that right there, that's a certain moment. Now, it's going to decline and we're going to slowly shrivel up, right? We're going to slowly dry up and everything's going to get weaker and frailer and more brittle. That's just how it is. We calcify, we harden, we get dry because we don't have enough essence. But imagine at this point, right here, we learn, hey, man, I should probably do what I can to preserve my life because I want to be healthy and I want to live long. Essence will preserve both of those things, just like protecting your DNA will preserve both those things. And if we lay the concepts completely, like I said, essence is going to quench the free radicals coming from whatever the pressures are, whatever the damage is, inflammation, oxidative damage, hypercoagulation, you name it, things that happen from all the interaction, infections, chronic infections, all kinds of things. We meet the world, right? And it puts pressure on us and we have to fight against it to stay alive. One of the thoughts, what life force is the ability to resist the dissipative forces of the universe around us, pulling us apart. We have to hold it together, and that costs essence. It scratches DNA, but essence protects DNA. Essence actually is one of the things that it becomes is this material called glutathione. I'd say it because you probably have heard about it. It's, if you're any investment at all, if you have any investment in this health and longevity realm, you've heard of glutathione. It's a primary structure that we use to quench free radicals, to neutralize reactive species, to neutralize mold, to neutralize mold toxins, to neutralize heavy metals, to make them non-damaging and to get them out of the body. We make it. But again, anything we make costs a little bit, right? So as we're going through this process of facing pressures from our ecological network, our DNA can't quite get full protection because we can't make enough protection to hold it. In the beginning of our life, we have so much essence and so much creation of our quenching system. We can quench all of the possible toxic, inflammatory signals, and everything is solid. But as we get older and our amount of essence starts to decline, we don't have enough. So how do we counter that? What do we do to change that? And how is this concept useful, right? And that's really something that I'd love to focus on in the next one of our YouTube presentations. So stick with us, stay tuned, and we'll dive into that.